person who thoroughly understood technological progress and the need to put new technologies to practical uses was Henry Ford, the automobile pioneer. At the same time that his assembly lines and car sales strategies were making America move, he was noting the passage of pre-industrial scenes from the American landscape. They were scenes he remembered well from his own life, scenes that told of a rural society turning into an urban society, of a society making its way by hand to one making its way by machine. He saw Americans building factories, working in factories, always trying to produce more and better goods, working with the new technologies they were discovering as they built America into the economic and industrial giant of the 20th century. Living amidst that tumultuous transformation and being responsible for a great deal of it himself, Henry Ford realized that people might easily forget the fascinating details, the work, the products, and the ironies of the times. And so to tell these stories of America, Henry Ford decided to build a museum complex. The site he chose was his hometown, Dearborn, Michigan. He decided to build an indoor museum, which he called the Edison Institute of Technology, after his revered friend, the great inventor Thomas Edison, and an open-air museum to be called Greenfield Village. In 1929, Mr. Ford was ready to unveil this extraordinary complex. He chose October 21st as the dedication date. The date was significant because it marked the 50th anniversary of Thomas Edison's invention of the first practical incandescent lamp. The day was chilly and rainy, but the arriving guests looked like the who's who of America and the world. With no cameras allowed, they dined beneath the chandeliers in the corridor of the new museum. Then a select group, including Thomas Edison, his assistant of 1879, Francis Yale, President Herbert Hoover, and Henry Ford, went to Edison's laboratory. Mr. Ford had moved the compound from Menlo Park, New Jersey, and reconstructed it in Greenfield Village. Edison recreated his invention of the incandescent lamp in a ceremony that was broadcast by radio around the world.
One of the great tricks about that was to get the... Yeah, we used to see them up too quick. But by bringing them up very high, it pumped out an enormous amount of air. I already got that in the mistake.
Over the years, the Edison Institute has become better known as the Henry Ford Museum. But Greenfield Village bears the same name it always has. And both still mark the constant changing of America. Since the gala dedication in 1929, millions of people have visited Henry Ford Museum and Greenfield Village. They're quickly absorbed by the authenticity of what they see. Both the museum and the village are quite large and show many different types of objects and activities. Taking a quick visual tour of each, let's start with Greenfield Village. Greenfield Village has many stories to tell about a great variety of people, their daily lives, and their work. A perennial highlight of the village is Thomas Edison's Menlo Park compound, still looking exactly as it did when it was dedicated in Greenfield Village in 1929. The very spot where the great inventor perfected the incandescent lamp and where he also worked on the phonograph and hundreds of other things. Other facilities of the Edison Lab, the world's first real research center. A number of the buildings in Greenfield Village are associated with people who became well known because of their accomplishments. Noah Webster, Henry Ford, the Wright brothers, while many others tell stories about the home lives and daily work of people whose names we no longer recall. These are perhaps the people we feel closest to today. The people who, as we do, needed to provide food, clothing, and shelter for themselves. People who witnessed many changes in the ways in which these necessities were made available to them. People who needed to adapt to change in order to keep up with new opportunities. In Greenfield Village, you can see these changes illustrated in the homes, shops, crafts, and industries. You can compare the kitchens of homes from various time periods. See some of the handcrafts that produced limited amounts of consumer goods. And see how they were phased out by the technology that made mass production possible. You can learn about different sources of power that were driving America. And see how people teamed up to make some complex new industries work. Because it's an open-air museum, Greenfield Village enjoys wonderful opportunities to tailor its programs to the seasons. The same village in winter, spring, summer, fall, and at holiday time tells different stories about people whose lives followed different patterns during these times of the year. There are many other opportunities, too, to highlight different themes from history. Or types of activity. Or collections of particular types of objects. Or the amusements and celebrations that people have always enjoyed and always will. Adjacent to Greenfield Village is the Henry Ford Museum, recognized worldwide by its facade, a replica of Philadelphia's Independence Hall. As Greenfield Village tells the story of the processes of living and working in America, Henry Ford Museum tells more about the tools and products. Exhibits in the museum stand as a tribute to the inventiveness of Americans, to their search for new ideas, new ways of doing things, new uses for resources at hand. It's a fascinating story, telling of people building a modern, unified, industrial nation out of what had been, in its earlier days, a fragmented agrarian society. Henry Ford Museum presents a wealth of information through its exhibits, leaving it to individual visitors to decide whether they'd like to get an overview of this story or whether to focus on one or two areas that especially interest them. Visitors often remark that they notice something new each time they come, or perhaps connect an exhibit with something they've heard or read about since their last visit. The museum is arranged by sections, highlighting some of the major aspects of American life. It includes one of the most comprehensive transportation collections in the country, a commanding vista of cars, trains, airplanes, and other vehicles. Some are landmark vehicles showing the first of a kind. Others help illustrate the growth of transportation and America's need to move its people and cargo over greater distances. There are sections, too, on the lighting of America's buildings and streets, on the development of communications systems over wires and over the airwaves. The country's most extensive collection of power machinery is in the museum. And there's a section devoted to the cultivation of food and other agricultural products. People's homes have changed over the years, and you can see what homes used to look like and how they function. Learning about people's daily routines, their amusements, their comforts, their tastes. Special changing exhibits are part of the museum's offerings. These exhibits can focus on new themes by tying certain collection items into new groupings or by showing items not normally on display. Also under the umbrella of the museum and village are educational programs for children, letting them experience firsthand a day in a one-room schoolhouse. And for adults, classes teaching time-honored skills and discussing antiques or the development of arts, industries, and trends. And presented throughout the year in the museum theater are plays and musical events that make the past come to life through drama, fantasy, and melody.
It's a good man's failing. Am I right or wrong? Right, folks?
Oh, you're right, Sid.
Poor old Nat, always.
All these activities, taking place at Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village, make America's history interesting and memorable, and preserve it for ourselves and for future generations. People from all around the country and from around the world have been visitors, learning about a great country on the move, recalling its start, its growth, the efforts of its people, the patterns of their lives, and perhaps forming some new thoughts of their own about life in our ever-changing America.